Jake had always been a normal college student, living a quiet life in his small apartment. It was a typical Friday night. The room was dimly lit with only the soft glow of his desk lamp as he worked through his textbooks, preparing for the final exams that seemed to loom over him. He had always been the kind of person who preferred staying in and getting things done, rather than going out partying like his friends. The clock ticked away, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of paper or the hum of his computer. But then, without any warning, a strange noise echoed through the apartment. It started as a low, vibrating hum, and then quickly grew louder. The lights flickered. Jake jumped from his chair, his heart racing as he looked around, unsure of what was happening. Before he could process the situation, an intense, blinding blue light filled the room, forcing him to shield his eyes. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, bright, pulsating, almost alive. His breath caught in his throat as the air around him seemed to warp. For a moment, everything felt wrong. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was going on. Was it a dream? Some kind of technological glitch? But no, this felt too real. Suddenly, there was a loud thud, and the light vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he blinked, his eyes adjusting to the dim light once more. And then he saw it. Lying on his bed, in the exact spot where only a second ago, there had been nothing, was a woman, an alien woman. Her appearance was striking. She had smooth, glowing skin that shimmered with a faint, otherworldly light, and her hair was silver, cascading down her shoulders in waves. Her eyes were the most unnatural shade of violet, glowing faintly in the dark room. Her features were delicate, almost too perfect, and her presence was both mesmerizing and unsettling. Jake stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. His mind struggled to comprehend the scene before him. Was this some kind of hallucination? Had he fallen asleep? But no, the sharpness of the air, the overwhelming energy in the room, it was all too real. He moved slowly toward her, unsure whether to approach or call for help. His hand hovered near his phone, but his instincts told him that this wasn't something a phone call could fix. As he took a cautious step forward, the alien woman's eyes fluttered open. Jake stumbled back, startled by the sudden movement. She blinked at him, her violet eyes focusing on him as if trying to make sense of her surroundings. For a moment, there was silence. Then, her lips parted, and she muttered something in a language Jake couldn't understand. It wasn't English, nor any language he'd ever heard before. The words were melodic, almost like music, but with an unsettling edge. Panic surged in Jake's chest. He had no idea who, or what, this person was, and her presence was only increasing his anxiety. Was she dangerous? Was she here to harm him? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind raced as his gaze darted around the room, looking for something he could use to defend himself, just in case. But then, something unexpected happened. The alien woman's expression softened, and she slowly sat up. Her body language shifted from one of confusion to one of calmness. With a flick of her hand, a small device appeared in the air beside her. It was sleek, metallic, and glowing faintly, something out of a science fiction movie. She pressed a button on the device, and a strange sound filled the room for a brief second before a voice, clear and perfectly intelligible, began speaking from the device. "Apologies. My language translator is now activated," the voice said in perfect English, though with a slight mechanical tone. Jake stared in disbelief. The device was a translator. He had never seen anything like it in his life. The alien woman spoke again, this time in English, though her accent was strange, almost musical. I am Liara," she said, her voice calm but filled with an underlying tension. "I do not know how I ended up here. I was, in the midst of a mission. Something went wrong. She trailed off, as though searching for the right words. Jake's mind was still reeling from the bizarre situation. He could barely keep up with her explanation. She was an alien. From somewhere else. And somehow, she had appeared in his room. He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "Who are you? Where are you from?" he asked, though his voice was shaking. Liara's expression became more serious as she looked at him. "I am a fugitive. I was fleeing from a war, and I ended up here, on Earth, by accident," she explained, her words carefully measured. "The enemies of my people, they will follow me here. You are in danger." The air in the room seemed to grow thicker, the weight of her words sinking in. Jake's heart rate sped up as he processed the gravity of the situation. Danger? He was in danger. From aliens? He had always believed in the possibility of extraterrestrial life, but never in his wildest dreams did he imagine he would be involved in something like this. Before he could respond, the room was filled with an ominous hum once again. Jake's eyes widened as a small, sleek craft appeared outside his window, hovering silently in the night sky. His instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he stepped toward the window, heart pounding in his chest. Liara grabbed his arm urgently. "We must leave. Now. They are here." The first wave of panic set in. Who were they? Was this the beginning of something much larger? And could he even help this alien stranger, who was now depending on him? As the hum of approaching ships grew louder, Jake's mind raced with questions, but there was only one thing he knew for sure now: his life would never be the same again. Jake didn't have much time to think. The strange noise outside his window was growing louder, more insistent. He turned back to Liara, whose eyes were wide with fear. "What do you mean, they're here?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he had no idea how to handle it. Liara didn't answer immediately. She was already moving towards the door, glancing over her shoulder at Jake. "I don't have much time to explain," she said, urgency in her voice. "They'll come looking for me, and when they do, they won't stop. You need to trust me if you want to survive." Jake stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. His heart was racing, and his mind was in turmoil. This was crazy. Just hours ago, he was sitting at his desk, studying for his exams, and now there was an alien in his room telling him that his life was in danger. It felt like a dream, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. But Liara was looking at him with pleading eyes, and Jake realized there was no time to waste. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but there was one thing he knew for sure: he couldn't leave her to face whatever was coming alone. Despite the fear creeping into his chest, he stepped toward her. "Okay," he said, his voice shaky but determined. "I'll help you. What do we do now?" Liara's face softened slightly, and she nodded. "We need to leave this place, now," she said firmly. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door, moving with a sense of purpose. The urgency in her movements made Jake feel like there was no time to waste. They quickly made their way through the apartment, and Jake grabbed his phone, his mind racing. Who was coming for Liara? What kind of war was she running from? He had so many questions, but he couldn't afford to ask them now. They were already running out of time. As they reached the door, Liara paused, her hand on the handle. "Jake," she said quietly, "they have technology beyond anything you've seen. Their ships, their weapons, they'll destroy everything in their path to get to me." Her voice was filled with fear, but also a deep determination. "I need you to stay close, and do exactly what I say. No matter what happens, stay with me." Jake swallowed hard. The weight of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He had no idea what kind of enemy they were up against, but he knew one thing for sure: he was in this now. With a deep breath, he nodded. "I understand." Liara led him through the building stairwell, moving quickly but quietly. They passed several doors, and Jake could hear the muffled sounds of other tenants in their apartments, oblivious to the danger that was creeping closer. His mind was still racing. What was happening? How could one alien woman be causing so much chaos? But as they stepped into the parking lot, Jake saw the small spacecraft Liara had mentioned earlier, still hovering silently in the sky. The sight of it made his stomach drop. It was sleek and metallic, with sharp angles and glowing lights. It didn't belong to Earth. There was no way it did. Jake stopped in his tracks, staring at it. "What is that?" he asked, barely able to get the words out. "That's my ship," Liara said quietly, glancing up at it. "It's my only chance to escape. I was supposed to leave Earth before they found me, but they're already here." She sounded frustrated, but there was no time for hesitation. They quickly made their way to the ship, and Liara guided Jake into the interior. The moment they stepped inside, Jake was hit with the overwhelming sense that he had crossed over into a different world. The inside of the ship was nothing like anything he had ever seen. It was smooth, metallic, and illuminated by soft blue lights that seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain. There were no buttons or switches in sight, everything appeared to be controlled by some sort of advanced technology Jake couldn't comprehend. As Liara navigated the controls, she glanced back at him. "You're safe for now. But this is only the beginning." Jake swallowed nervously, the weight of her words sinking in. What had he gotten himself into? But before he could ask any more questions, a loud thud echoed from outside the ship. His blood ran cold. "They're here," Liara whispered. She moved quickly to the control panel, typing something into the air in front of her. The ship hummed to life, and Jake felt a sudden jolt as it lifted off the ground, rising into the sky. The city below them became smaller and smaller as they ascended, and Jake could see flashes of light in the distance. Were they explosions? Laser blasts? Liara was focused on the controls, but Jake couldn't stop staring out the window, his heart racing. He had no idea what was going on, or who was chasing them, but he could feel the danger closing in. A voice crackled through the ship's communication system, and Jake's eyes widened as he listened. It was a distorted, robotic voice, definitely not human. "Liara," it said coldly. "You cannot escape. We will find you. You cannot hide. The Council will have you." Liara clenched her fists, her face hardening. "I won't let them take me," she muttered. "Not again." Jake turned to her, his mind spinning with more questions. But before he could ask her anything, she spoke again. "We need to go into hiding. I'll explain everything soon, but for now, you have to trust me. We can't let them catch us." "Not yet." Jake nodded, though he didn't fully understand what was happening. But in that moment, something shifted inside him. He had no idea how or why, but he felt a strange connection to this alien woman. She wasn't just a stranger, she was someone who needed his help. And somehow, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the ship sped into the night sky, with the sound of distant engines and explosions echoing in the distance, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. And despite the fear and uncertainty, a part of him couldn't help but feel that he was part of something much bigger than he ever imagined. The ship's engine hummed steadily as it cut through the atmosphere, the city lights below growing dimmer with every passing second. Jake sat in the seat across from Liara, his mind racing with a million questions. The outside world seemed so far away now, like a distant memory. All that mattered in that moment was the strange alien woman sitting in front of him, and the fact that they were being hunted by unknown forces. "Where are we going?" Jake finally managed to ask, his voice breaking the silence that had settled between them. Liara's hands hovered over the control panel, her eyes focused on the displays in front of her. She didn't look up immediately, as if deep in thought. "We need to get out of Earth's orbit," she said after a long pause. "The Council's ships are already on their way, and we won't be safe until we're far from here." Jake nodded, though he still didn't fully understand. The Council? Who were they, and why did they want Liara so badly? What was she running from? His head was spinning. Everything had happened so fast, and now, all he could do was sit back and hope she had a plan. The ship shuddered slightly as it accelerated, moving faster than anything Jake had ever experienced. The stars outside the window became streaks of light as they moved farther and farther from Earth. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weightlessness of space, the quiet hum of the ship, and the feeling that they were free from the chaos below. But that peace didn't last long. A loud, shrill beep came from the console, jolting both of them back to reality. Liara's hands moved swiftly, tapping on the controls with practiced precision. "They found us," she said quietly. There was no panic in her voice, but Jake could feel the urgency building. "They've already locked onto our position. We need to move quickly." Before Jake could react, a deep, metallic voice crackled through the ship's communication system, sending a chill down his spine. "Liara, you cannot escape. Surrender now, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Liara didn't flinch at the threat. Instead, she punched a few more buttons, her face hardening. "I won't surrender," she muttered under her breath. "Not this time." The ship began to shake violently as a blast of energy hit the shields. The lights inside flickered for a second, and Jake grabbed the armrest, trying to steady himself. The impact was jarring, but it wasn't enough to knock them out of the sky. The shields held, but just barely. "They're firing at us," Jake said, his voice low with shock. "Are we going to make it?" Liara didn't answer right away. Instead, she quickly punched a series of commands into the control panel. The ship lurched again, and Jake was thrown forward, his body slamming into the seat in front of him. "Hang on!" Liara shouted as she gripped the controls with both hands. "We need to break free." Another blast hit the ship, and this time, Jake felt the heat from the explosion. He instinctively pulled back, holding his breath. Liara was still focused, her eyes locked on the display, calculating their escape route. Jake could see that she was not only skilled at flying this ship but was also deeply familiar with the technology. She had a plan. At least, he hoped she did. Suddenly, the ship lurched once more, but this time, it wasn't from an explosion. It was something else. The view outside the window began to change. The stars twisted and bent as the ship activated some sort of advanced cloaking device. The edges of the ship shimmered, becoming almost invisible, blending with the darkness of space. Jake blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. "What's happening? Are we invisible?" he asked, astonished. Liara gave him a brief, but reassuring glance. "Yes. It's a temporary cloak, but it should be enough to get us out of their range." For a moment, everything was still. There was no sound except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. The outside world was hidden from sight, and Jake felt a strange mix of relief and fear. He wasn't sure if they had escaped, but for the first time in what felt like hours, there was a sense of hope. But that hope was short-lived. The communication system buzzed again, the same metallic voice cutting through the silence. "You cannot hide, Liara. You cannot run. We will find you. You will be destroyed." The voice was so cold, so final. It made Jake's blood run cold. Who was this voice? What did they want with Liara? Liara didn't look up this time. Her jaw was clenched, and her fingers moved swiftly over the controls. "I knew this wasn't going to be easy," she said quietly. "But I didn't expect them to come this fast." Jake felt the weight of her words. He still didn't fully understand who these enemies were, but one thing was clear, they were relentless. And they weren't going to stop until they had her. "I'm not going to let them win," Liara added, her voice determined. "I've been running for too long. I won't let them take me." Jake nodded, his heart racing. He didn't know what she had been through, but he knew she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Suddenly, a new sound filled the cockpit, a deep rumble, followed by the unmistakable whine of an incoming weapon. Jake's eyes widened as he looked outside the window. Just beyond the edge of the cloak, he could make out the dark silhouettes of enemy ships. They were closing in, their weapons charging for another attack. "They're going to destroy us if we don't move," Liara said, her voice tight with urgency. Jake's mind raced. "What can we do?" he asked, feeling helpless. Liara glanced back at him, her face filled with a fierce resolve. "We fight. We survive." With a roar, the ship shot forward, breaking free from the cloak. The stars rushed past them as they darted through space, heading for a nearby asteroid field. Liara gripped the controls, guiding them with a steady hand. Every instinct in Jake told him that they had only moments before the enemy would catch up. "We're not out of danger yet," Liara said as the ship wove through the asteroids, narrowly avoiding collisions. "But this is our best chance." Jake's heart was in his throat, but as the enemy ships followed, closing in, he knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, he was in this fight with her. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the ship darted through the asteroid field. Each sharp turn felt like they were seconds away from colliding with a massive rock, but Liara's control was flawless. Her fingers moved with the speed and precision of someone who had been in the heat of battle before. The enemy ships were relentless, their sleek forms cutting through the vastness of space, closing the gap between them and their target. Jake glanced at the screen. It was a matter of time before the pursuing ships would fire again, and they had no more cloaking devices left. The ship's hull had already taken some damage from the previous attacks, and they couldn't keep running forever. "Liara, how much longer until we can outrun them?" Jake asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Liara didn't take her eyes off the controls. "We can't outrun them. Not on our own." Jake's stomach sank. He looked out of the window again, hoping for a miracle, but the sight that met him made his blood run cold. Another ship had emerged from the shadows, far larger and more menacing than the ones chasing them. It had the dark, heavy shape of something designed for destruction. Liara's expression darkened when she saw the new arrival. "We're not alone," she whispered. "That's a bounty hunter ship." Jake frowned, confusion taking over. "A bounty hunter? Why would a bounty hunter be after us? Who would pay someone to hunt you?" Liara's face was grim. She didn't answer immediately. The ship rocked again, a sudden, sharp hit from the enemy ships still tailing them. Jake grabbed onto his seat, the impact throwing him off balance. "This is bad," she muttered under her breath. "I need to focus." As Liara concentrated on dodging the incoming attacks, Jake tried to make sense of the situation. A bounty hunter? He had heard the term before, but he had no idea that they existed in this galaxy, especially not ones after someone like Liara. What could possibly make her so valuable to be pursued by not just the Galactic Council, but a bounty hunter as well? The enemy ships were getting closer, their weapons powering up for another attack. But Liara wasn't worried. She seemed calm, her eyes narrowing as she guided the ship through a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. "Hold on tight," she said, her voice steady but tense. Jake barely had time to brace himself before the ship lurched, pushing forward with sudden force. The ship sped up, racing toward the new threat. Liara's face was set, determination radiating off her as she aimed straight for the bounty hunter's ship. The larger ship didn't flinch. It was built to withstand attacks, designed for battle. But the bounty hunter was clearly not expecting Liara to take the fight to them. As they neared, the hunter's ship fired first, the blasts lighting up the vast emptiness of space. Jake winced as one of the shots barely missed their ship, the explosion creating a shockwave that rattled the entire cockpit. But Liara didn't hesitate. She dodged the incoming fire with expert precision, swerving the ship in a series of tight turns, avoiding the deadly blasts. "They're good," Jake said, awe creeping into his voice. "They're not the problem," Liara replied, her voice sharp. "The bounty hunter is." Jake's mind raced as he tried to piece everything together. Who was this bounty hunter? Why was Liara so afraid of them? He watched as the bounty hunter's ship fired another round, this time aimed directly at the ship's engines. Liara's hands flew over the controls, and with a sharp turn, they narrowly avoided the attack. "Hold on," she shouted as she executed a roll, the ship flipping in mid-air to dodge another shot. But this time, the enemy ship was not far behind. It was relentless, like a predator stalking its prey. "We're running out of options," Jake shouted, fear creeping into his voice. "What do we do now?" Liara's grip on the controls tightened. She didn't seem afraid, but there was a certain edge to her voice. "We're going to make them regret chasing us." Before Jake could ask her what she meant, Liara pulled the ship into a sharp dive, heading straight toward a dense cluster of asteroids. It was a risk, one that could end with them crashing into the rocks, but it was also their best shot at losing their pursuers. The bounty hunter's ship followed them, closing in rapidly. The weapons on the ship powered up again, but Liara was faster. With a twist of the controls, she shot the ship toward an asteroid, and the bounty hunter's shots slammed into the rock instead, sending debris flying. Jake's heart was in his throat as the ship weaved through the asteroid field, narrowly avoiding collisions with the massive rocks. It was an intense, heart-stopping chase. But then, just as Jake thought they were about to be caught, something unexpected happened. Liara activated another weapon, one that Jake hadn't seen before. The ship's underbelly glowed, and a sudden burst of energy shot out from the back, hitting the bounty hunter's ship directly. The ship's shields flared, but it wasn't enough. With a loud crash, the bounty hunter's ship began to spiral, losing control. "They're disabled," Liara said, her voice surprisingly calm, though her knuckles were white from gripping the controls. "But they're not done yet." Jake's eyes widened as he saw the enemy ship wobble and attempt to regain stability. "What now?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency. Liara didn't hesitate. "Now, we finish this." The ship turned again, this time flying toward the disabled enemy ship at full speed. The bounty hunter's ship tried to retaliate, but it was too late. Liara hit it with another blast, this time more powerful than the first, and the ship exploded in a burst of light. For a moment, everything was still. The enemy ships stopped their pursuit, and the asteroid field fell silent once again. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Liara leaned back in her seat, exhaling deeply. "That should buy us some time." Jake stared at her, his mind reeling. They had just taken down a bounty hunter, someone who was clearly an expert in combat and pursuit. But Liara didn't seem surprised, or even shaken. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Jake asked, more than a little in awe. Liara looked at him with a faint, almost sad smile. "More times than I care to remember." The quiet of space was deceptive. After the bounty hunter's ship had been destroyed, Jake thought they might finally catch a break. But Liara's expression remained tense, her eyes scanning the stars ahead of them with unblinking focus. Something wasn't right. "What now?" Jake asked, trying to hide the uncertainty in his voice. Liara didn't look at him immediately. Her hands moved over the controls, flicking switches and checking readouts. The calm atmosphere in the cockpit made Jake even more uneasy. He knew she was always prepared, but the stillness around them felt like the calm before a storm. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice low. "They'll be back." Jake's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was happening. The bounty hunter was only one part of the puzzle, and now, Liara's warning was sinking in. Whoever had sent the hunter wasn't going to stop just because they took out one ship. Suddenly, the ship shook. Jake gripped his seat instinctively as the sound of enemy weapons fire echoed through the ship's hull. It had come from behind them, but there was no sign of the attackers on the radar. The ship rocked again, this time with more force. Liara! Jake shouted, his voice rising in panic. What's happening? They've activated a cloaking device, she replied calmly, even as her fingers flew across the console. We can't see them, but they can see us. Before Jake could respond, another hit rocked the ship, sending them spiraling through the void. He felt his stomach twist as the force pushed him back in his seat. He struggled to regain his balance, watching in disbelief as the cockpit's displays went haywire. Warning lights flashed across the screen, and the hum of the ship's systems began to waver. Hold on. Liara barked, steering the ship with expert precision, but the invisible enemy was fast. They were outmatched, and Jake could feel the panic creeping into his thoughts. It seemed like every move they made was countered by the enemy's relentless pursuit. A growl of frustration escaped Liara as she pushed the ship into a sharp maneuver, evading another blast. I need more power, she muttered under her breath, glancing at Jake. We need to get out of here, fast. What's our plan? Jake asked, his voice tight. There's no plan, she said, almost sounding like she was talking to herself. It's a fight for survival. Jake's mind raced as the realization hit him. They were cornered. No one had come to help them. The council had already sent their best hunters, and even though they had managed to take down the first one, there was no way they could keep evading this enemy forever. Whoever was behind all of this had unlimited resources, and Liara was the key to their plan. Another hit rattled the ship, this time closer to the engine. Jake felt the heat of the explosion seep through the hull, and the ship's system sputtered. A warning popped up on the screen, indicating a breach in one of the fuel lines. Liara cursed under her breath. This is bad, she said. If that breach gets any worse, we're done for. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at her. The calm, composed woman who had been his ally through all of this was now visibly shaken. This was no longer a fight for survival, it was a fight for their lives. What are we going to do? Jake asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Liara turned to him, her eyes hard. We fight. She gripped the controls with renewed determination, twisting the ship into a high-speed roll to dodge another blast. Her focus was complete, but there was something in her eyes, an unspoken understanding. This was it. There would be no more running. We don't have much time, she said, her voice clipped. We'll need to hit them hard, or we won't make it. Before Jake could ask what she meant, the enemy ship reappeared on the radar, now visible but still cloaked in some kind of stealth field. It was larger than the previous ones, its black, angular shape more intimidating than anything they had faced so far. Its weapons were already primed, and its purpose was clear, it had come to finish them off. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He was ready to fight, but this enemy wasn't like the others. This was the final battle. Liara wasn't just trying to escape anymore, she was preparing for a showdown. The enemy ship fired first. This time, the blast hit close enough to breach the outer shields, sending shockwaves through the ship. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. Liara cursed again, but her eyes never left the target. The ship's weaponry was more powerful than anything Jake had ever seen. They needed to stop it, or they wouldn't have a chance. We can't outrun them anymore, Liara said as she turned to him. Get to the lower deck. I need you to handle the weapons systems. I'll keep them distracted. Jake's mouth went dry. Weapons systems, he repeated, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. Do you trust me? Liara's eyes locked onto his, a fierce, unwavering gaze. Jake didn't hesitate. Yes. Without another word, Liara slammed the ship into another evasive maneuver. The enemy fired again, narrowly missing them. The space outside their ship seemed to explode into violent bursts of light as both ships exchanged fire. Jake raced to the lower deck, his heart pounding as he ran through the narrow corridors. He found the weapons control center and immediately began reading the screens, trying to make sense of the systems. His hands shook, but he focused, trying to ignore the sounds of explosions and impacts coming from above. Back on the main deck, Liara was pushing the ship to its limits. She expertly weaved through enemy fire, keeping the enemy off balance. But she couldn't do it alone. It was up to Jake now. His fingers flew across the controls as he locked onto the enemy ship, aligning the ship's weapons with the target. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and fired. The first shot missed, but the second one hit, striking the enemy ship's engines. The ship jolted, its course veering off as Liara took advantage of the opening. With one final, powerful shot, they disabled the enemy ship, sending it spiraling into space. Liara's voice came through the comms, relief evident in her voice. "Nice shot, Jake." Jake exhaled in relief. The battle was over. But as he looked at the damage to their ship, he knew this victory was just the beginning. The war was far from over. The stars outside the ship's window glimmered like scattered diamonds against the endless darkness of space. The sounds of the battle had faded, leaving a strange, uneasy silence. Jake leaned back in his seat, taking a deep breath, his body exhausted but his mind racing. They had survived the final showdown, but the cost of their victory was still sinking in. Liara sat across from him, her posture tense but her eyes reflecting something different now. The fierce warrior he had known was still there, but beneath it, something softer had emerged. She was no longer just a stranger from another world. She was an ally, someone who had shared in the fight, and more than that, someone who had helped him survive. "Is it over?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse from the battle. Liara didn't answer immediately. She stared out the window, her hands resting on the console in front of her. Jake watched her, wondering what she was thinking. For the first time, he saw a hint of vulnerability in her. Despite her strength and her determination, there was something about this battle that had left its mark on her too. "It's not over," she finally said, turning to face him. "This was just one part of a much larger fight. The Council will not stop. They have vast resources, and they won't forget what we did today." Jake clenched his fists, a wave of frustration washing over him. He had hoped that after the fight, things might calm down. But Liara's words reminded him of the truth: the battle was just the beginning. The Council's reach was vast, and they wouldn't stop until they had captured or destroyed them. "But we've proven something," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We've shown that we can fight back. We can win." Liara met his gaze, her eyes intense. "Yes, but it's not enough. We need to gather allies, build strength. This is just one victory, Jake. The real war is yet to come." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. He had always thought of Earth as just a small part of a vast galaxy, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But now, after everything he had seen, he knew that Earth wasn't so small after all. Humanity had power, strength, and the will to fight. They were more than just a tiny planet among countless others, they were survivors, and that made them a force to be reckoned with. "We need to contact the others," Jake said, suddenly feeling a sense of urgency. "We need to get word out to the rest of the galaxy. Let them know what we've accomplished here." Liara smiled faintly. "Already done. The message has been sent. But we'll need to move quickly. The Council will be looking for us now, and they'll want to silence any resistance before it grows." Jake couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. For so long, Earth had been seen as weak, unimportant in the eyes of the galaxy's powerful empires. But today, they had made their mark. They had fought back, and they had won. If they could do that, maybe there was a chance for more. Maybe they could build something larger than just survival. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "We train," Liara replied, her voice steady. "We prepare. The fight will come to us, but we won't be caught off guard again. I'll teach you everything I know, and together, we'll make sure Earth is ready for whatever comes next. Jake felt a surge of determination. They had a long road ahead, but they weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and they had hope. The thought was strange but comforting. A few days ago, he never would have imagined that he'd be in this position, fighting alongside an alien to protect Earth from a powerful galactic empire. But now, everything had changed. And he was ready for whatever came next. The hum of the ship's engines broke the silence, and Jake turned to see Liara adjusting the controls. They were on course now, heading toward the next step of their journey. But there was something different about her now, something softer that Jake hadn't seen before. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was a part of something bigger, something that involved Earth, humanity, and the fight for their future. As the ship sped through the stars, Jake felt a new sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult, and there would be challenges, losses, and battles. But they would face them together. They would be ready. "We'll make them see," Jake said, his voice firm. "We'll make the galaxy see what Earth is capable of." Liara looked at him, her expression unreadable. But then, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I believe you, Jake. I believe in humanity." With those words, something shifted inside him. It wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. It was about making a stand, proving to the galaxy that Earth was more than just a target. It was a force to be reckoned with. Together, they would fight, and they would win. The stars outside the ship seemed to shine a little brighter now, as if reflecting the newfound hope that was burning inside him. This was just the beginning. The real battle was ahead of them, but they were no longer just two survivors. Now, they were a team, and with that, they were stronger than ever. They had won the first battle, and now it was time to fight for the future.